Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we're doing our 2025 rookie running back rankings pre-NFL draft. So obviously, it'll be important for us to know draft capital and as well as the depth chart with these running backs as to where they're going and if we can expect things out of them. So these rankings are purely as prospects themselves.
Yeah, and I think we have about 28 players here, so we got pretty much every single running back that we perceive to be drafted, and even some undrafted guys as well. So I think we've covered most of our bases here. So let's go ahead. So what we're going to be doing here, we're just going to be doing the classic tier list ranking, right, from F to S, and we're going to be going from F all the way to our S tier. So we're going to start with our worst perceived running backs as far as our rankings go, and then go all the way up to S. So we're starting off with Jaden Blue out of Texas. So at least for him, he just didn't have a lot of ball security for me. Change direction wasn't that great. He just didn't pop off for me on tape. And we're going to go through most of these guys pretty quickly until we get to like our top 10 or so. So yeah, he just didn't really impress me too much on film.
He's straight line speed, but that's pretty much
yeah.
That's it.
So on to the next one, Jaquindon Jackson. What do you think about old Jaquindon?
He's an average player. I will say the thing that worries me the most with him is his vision. It was relatively poor considering most of this class has good vision. So I just don't think he's going to be very efficient, and I think that's going to be a problem for him.
For sure. And that rounds off our F tier. For me, Jaquindon Jackson just ran straight into whatever hole. A lot of the times he's running in the back of his offensive line. So that's going to be definitely a big time issue he's going to have to clean up. And I mean, as far as the physicality goes, he's a big back. He's a really physical guy, but he's going to have to clean up the vision on the back end for sure. So moving on to our E tier. First guy, a little surprising. I know he had a lot of hype coming on at the beginning of the year. I had Donovan Edwards here. Speed wasn't really there for me. Vision might also be the worst in the class. At least from our rankings, he's the worst in the class when it comes to vision. It's like Jaquindon Jackson's vision on steroids. It was just running into the back of his linemen pretty much all the time. And, that's kind of worrisome for me. So, yeah, he just didn't really have much for me. And the speed definitely wasn't there on film either. He's kind of cool out of the backfield, but, I mean, he just doesn't offer much after the catch.
He's more of a camp body.
Jeez Louise. Yeah. So moving on, we have another Michigan player in Khalil Mullings. What did you feel about old Khalil?
So I thought with Khalil Mullings that, he's very physical, and I do think that, at best, in my opinion, he could fill out some kind of goal line role, but I really just don't think he's dynamic enough, and I don't think his vision is particularly great either.
Yeah, and definitely probably the biggest liability in the class in terms of pass catching for me. I mean, he just does not offer any sort of upside when it comes to pass catching, like at all. Moving on next is, a guy that we wanted to like a lot, and there was a lot of, solid flashes on film when plays worked out. It's Trevor Etienne out of Georgia. For me, he just had a lot of – he's just limited, like, in all aspects. Not super shifty, not super fast, really. He's average everywhere. He's just your prototypical average at best back. And if he gets gaping holes, I mean, he's definitely going to, be relatively productive. But you just saw it at Georgia this year. He was just, they couldn't get the ball rolling with him at all.
I think the biggest issue with him, at least I think the biggest reason he's not his brother is he just doesn't have that game-breaking burst that Etienne showed back when he was in college. Yeah. And so, like you said, just fine at a lot of things, but not any one thing that he's particularly dominant in.
Yeah, next one is going to be a pretty surprising one. This guy's getting a lot of buzz. Brashard Smith out of SMU, converted wide receiver to running back. How do you feel about this guy?
I think he definitely has a case to potentially be the best receiving back in the class, and I think that's obviously a big reason. He's a converted wide receiver. He just isn't going to break any tackles.
Yeah, he's just very, very – I mean, he's had a really good production this year in terms of a runner, but I just don't see his skinny frame holding up at the next level. He'll be somewhere in
Same,
that Kenneth
right?
Gainwell, Justice Hill kind of thing at his ceiling for me. I don't think he gets a lot of work rushing at the next level. So, yeah, there's that. Moving on to another pretty surprising one at the top of our E tier here is Dylan Sampson out of Tennessee. Some guys, there's a lot of content creators that are saying this guy's top 5, top 4 running back for them even. He's way down here for us. I mean, he's in our 20s. We just didn't see a lot of good things. I mean, especially the physicality. We like our backs at the next level to be able to shed through contact, relatively consistently. We didn't see that at all. And obviously he's got some home run speed, but it just outside of that, I just thought he was like worse Bashal Tootin in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think he's a particularly poor receiver as well.
Yeah, that one's for sure. In terms of this is the bottom of our D tier here now. We get Jarquez Hunter out of Auburn. We actually were, relatively surprised with him because he's kind of one of those 4th, 5th round guys. What did you see in his film?
So with Jarquez Hunter, he's definitely very physical and he has relatively decent burst. But I just don't think that he's really particularly great at much. And so I think that's just going to limit his upside. And I just don't think he's going to get the draft capital, especially.
Yeah, relatively physical guy, solid vision. Auburn relied on him a good bit this year, but yeah, there's just not a lot of high end traits that we think might translate at the next level for sure. On to the next one, we got Raheem Sanders, a big back. I think he's in that 230-pound range out of South Carolina. Big guy. But the physicality, we thought he was a little too easy to tackle for his size. Obviously, I know he ran pretty well at the combine. I think he was in the 4.5s, which I thought was pretty impressive for his size. I thought he was going to be in the 4.6s, kind of like Kaleb Johnson was. But yeah, he kind of impressed at the combine a little bit. But just physicality, yeah, he's physical, but he runs with some good pad level at times. But outside of that, I don't see any high end traits for him.
Yeah, so he actually ran a 4.46, believe it or not.
Really? Yeah, that's
Yeah,
even better.
shocking. What everybody wanted Ollie Gordon to do, basically.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
anyways, yeah, with Sanders, if he's able to get, a straight lane ahead and get into the open field, he is going to get chugging and kind of break some long runs. It's just you know, he's just once again not as physical as you would like for somebody that's as big as he is.
And this is why I think watching film is so important because if I didn't watch any film this year, this guy probably would have been in my top 5 running backs. So, in speaking of Ollie Gordon, we have Ollie Gordon here out of Oklahoma State. I thought a lot of good things about Ollie Gordon in 2023. Obviously, that huge year. He had that big year at Oklahoma State in 2023, and everybody was thinking, one more good year out of him, he's going to be a first-round pick all the way. Oklahoma State just did not have a very good team this year. They didn't win a single conference game, and his production took a dramatic step down. Not super fast at all. Super physical, super big. He's, I think, 6'1", 230. Super big guy. Obviously loves to be physical. He reminds me a lot of kind of like Najee Harris, but a little bit worse. But, the speed's not there. He's not a particularly great pass catcher either. I think he'll be a goal line back on a team for a few years, and maybe he'll get some 3-down work, but I don't think he's going to be very efficient.
Now he's a linear athlete, and he just doesn't have the long speed. I think you comped him to no big play Derrick Henry.
Yes. Yes, and I will say, if he does end up on a team like, obviously he's not going to end up on the Eagles, but like a team like the Eagles that has really good run blocking, like he could be a relatively efficient back, but those teams usually already have a running back in place, so I don't know where he fits in on those teams really. Moving on to the next running back on our list. We got LaQuint Allen. How'd you feel about LaQuint Allen out of Syracuse?
All right, so with LaQuint Allen, I actually think that he has the potential to be a third down back at the NFL level. And it's surprising, right? Because he isn't the best runner of the football. His vision is fine. He is a little bit physical at the goal line and in short yardage situations, but he's just not dynamic enough. His burst isn't particularly great, and his long speed is atrocious. But in terms of as a receiving back, he can be used deep down the field. He can run your China routes. His route running is some of the best in the class, up there with somebody like Brashard Smith, which is impressive because Smith, was a converted receiver. So I actually am a little bit higher on LaQuint Allen, I think, than some people are going to be. But once again, this is just such a good class that he's just way down here for us.
Yeah, and I think part of his efficiency this year running the ball has to do with Syracuse's air raid offense. I mean, they threw the ball pretty much more than anybody else in college football last year. And, he kind of got positives because of that, because defenses were always expecting the pass. So I think some of his efficiency comes from the scheme for sure. Moving on next, we got Phil Maffa. Things about Phil Maffa that I like, he's a super physical guy. He reminds me a good bit of, kind of like Raheem Sanders in a bit. They're kind of similar players. I think he's slightly faster than Raheem Sanders, at least on the field. I don't know what his 40 time was, but he just didn't really show me a lot of high-end traits, right? He wasn't particularly great at catching passes, and, his vision was a little iffy from time to time. And, I think he's just going to be one of those average backs that, might end up on a team as far as a depth role is concerned. Most of these D-tier guys probably are going to have a hard time carving out a role, maybe with an exception of like Ollie Gordon and LaQuint Allen, really. But, yeah, I didn't really see much on film with Phil Maffa outside of, some really good physicality.
I think he's a two-down plotter. He is very poor after the catch, and just the route running is very, very basic stuff.
For sure. All right, next up, we have Taj Brooks out of Texas Tech. How are you feeling about Taj Brooks? Guy that actually impressed a little bit, I think, at the combine from what I was seeing.
Yeah, so he's a very physical runner of the football. He is violent, seeks contact, lowers his shoulder, right, to extend the play and get more yardage. But he's surprisingly poor in terms of his contact balance, which, given his physicality, is quite surprising. And overall, I just think that he's a little bit below average to at best average with his long speed. And so once again, like a lot of these guys, he doesn't have any of these traits that I think are really going to lead to him being dynamic and owning a backfield.
Yeah, and I do think that his catching is pretty reliable, even though he's not great after the catch. I think, he could be one of those guys that carves out a role just as like a goal line back, maybe. But it's going to have to clean up the contact balance for sure. I also think he's a relatively bigger back as well. All right, so that was our D tier level of prospects. Now we're moving into our C tier, and at the bottom of our C tier, we have DJ Giddens, a guy that's also getting a little bit of hype as well. Guy that's been producing pretty well at Kansas State as well. Things that I don't like about DJ Giddens is mainly his contact balance and physicality. He's very easy to tackle if somebody gets their hands on you. But, very consistent with his vision, never really making mistakes. His ball security is pretty good. He's not really bad at anything outside of his physical attributes in terms of his contact balance and his overall physicality with contact, which is something that is really, really lacking with him. And I think that's going to definitely hurt him at the NFL level. But if he carves out a role where, he, like maybe in San Francisco or something where you're not really getting touched until you're at the second level, and he can use that agility of his, he can definitely be an efficient runner, but don't get your hands on him or he's going to be tackled.
Yeah, so I think he's really creative. He actually reminds me quite a bit of David Johnson,
Oh, yeah.
with a very rough David Johnson, but it's really more so in that he's incredibly tall, runs with extremely high pad levels. So that is something I don't like. But he has incredible agility and, change of direction ability, which for somebody that's as tall as he is incredible, but it's just his long speed isn't there despite him running a 4.43 40. That does not translate in game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the long speed definitely. You saw him getting caught a lot uh, at Kansas State. So moving on to the next guy, we got Corey Kiner out of Cincinnati. How are you feeling about old Corey Kiner?
Alright, so with Corey Kiner, he's definitely good with his contact balance and his vision. I think though that he has good change of direction and agility, but I think it's more so just because he doesn't have the good long speed, and so when you're not running quite as quickly, it is able to be more versatile in the. It's easier to be more versatile in the open field. I just don't think that he's going to end up getting the draft capital most likely to really own a backfield. And I just don't think he's incredibly impressive, but I think he does carve out a minimal role. And if some guys get injured in front of him, I definitely think that he could get some work.
Yeah, yeah, and his agility was something that really kind of caught us off guard, especially like right at the line. Like if somebody at Cincinnati's run blocking, I mean, we saw that on film a lot. It was not very good. They were not doing him many favors, but yet he still, had some good efficiency this year. So looking forward to see how he does in his NFL tenure. Hopefully, like you said, he can get some opportunities and maybe show off some of that uh, really solid agility that he has because he is definitely fun to watch. Moving on, we have Damian Martinez out of Miami. So a guy that we both really were kind of surprised at in terms of his overall grade. We didn't really know too much about this guy until we, watched film on him. Super physical back, man. He loves contact. Super hard to tackle as well. Really, really good, reliable in terms of like not fumbling, things like that. Obviously, the long speed's not really there with a lot of these power backs, right? Like your, Ollie Gordons and your Raheem Sanders and things like that. Like these bigger power backs, they sacrifice the long speed in exchange for this physicality, which in my opinion, I like. Not every back's going to be Saquon Barkley breaking all these really long runs. Thought he was pretty good in pass pro as well, one of the better pass protectors as well. But he's just going to be one of those later round guys, right? And the hit rates on these later round guys are just really not that great. And hopefully he can have some sort of role as a depth piece in an offense until, maybe an opportunity comes.
And I definitely think that he could potentially be a third down option because he is rather good in pass protection. So yeah, like I said, if he goes to a really weak, like you said, if he goes to a really weak backfield, or if maybe there's like a bunch of injuries, definitely think that he has the build as well to get some work. It's just the draft capital isn't going to be there most likely, and yeah, I just think it's going to be unlikely that he does too much.
Yeah, yeah, and for sure, as far as the build, he is super solid. Um, Now, in terms of the next guy, we have probably one of the highest upside players in the entire draft. You saw that at the combine. I mean, he destroyed the combine. Got Bashal Tutin out of Virginia Tech, a guy that you're definitely high on outside of a couple things, right? So, I mean, let's hear your opinion on Bashal Tutin.
With Bashal Tutin, he has this elite long speed as well as his acceleration. I would say ultimately his long speed is a little bit better than his burst, but both are elite in my opinion. Probably the best combination of burst and long speed in the class. Now, you might be asking yourself, if this guy is so fast, why isn't he much higher up on this list? Well, the biggest reason is just that he fumbles, and he's also not projected to be an incredibly high draft pick. Now, his stock is for sure up, but the fumbling is just if he's unable to, and it's also, in my opinion, the worst in the class potentially too. I
Oh
just think
yeah.
that's going to get him benched potentially and prevent him from being good. And also with his vision, he ran into the back of his offensive line quite a bit. If the hole just wasn't wide open for him, then he just wasn't really creating anything himself. But if there was something available and he's able to go untouched, he is gone.
Yeah, and we saw that time after time. If you watch any sort of film on Bashal Tutin, he's breaking a 50, 60-yard run pretty much every single time you watch him. I mean, that's his upside, and if he gets on a team that can, get some gaps for him and just let him go, there's going to be very few guys on NFL defenses that are going to be able to catch this guy for sure. So moving on to the next guy, we have Cam Scatabo. A lot of guys that, there's a lot of people that are really high on Cam Scatabo, top 5 running back in the class. And, I definitely get the hype, right, because he caught a lot of passes this year, had insane production this year as well. But there's definitely some limitations to his game for sure, especially his long speed, his burst as well. Like, I think he's probably got the best contact balance in the entire class. I don't know if that's particularly close. I mean, him and Jeanty are, neck and neck for that. But, yeah, he's just super physical, hard-nosed runner. Doesn't really use agility all that much. He uses it maybe to, dart into certain holes from time to time. But, I mean, after that, he's just running through people until he gets tackled, and that's basically his running style. And I don't know how that translates on an NFL field, in all honesty. And, I don't know how he holds up either. But if he can hold up at that next level, I think he's Marshawn Lynch upside.
Yeah, he definitely has the Marshawn Lynch upside. It's just, like you mentioned, the vision at times is a little bit spotty, and he just tries to use brute force. But to be fair to him, brute force has definitely worked out for him so far in his collegiate career.
Yeah, for sure. He's super physical and really, really hard to tackle. I mean, might be one of the hardest guys to tackle in this entire class. So now that we've moved through all of these guys, now we're going to our top 10 guys. We're going to go a little more in depth on all of these guys. So at our number 10 spot, we have Devin Neal out of Kansas. Go ahead and tell us a little bit about Devin Neal. I know you like this guy a lot.
So I really like Devin Neal, as you mentioned. So he lacks some things that I really prefer in my running backs, such as elite long speed. As you can see, it's just not particularly great. Now, in terms of his physicality, it's also not particularly great. But with Devin Neal, his vision, in my opinion, is potentially the best in the class. It's definitely top 3. He's an incredibly patient runner, and his running style, and now I'm not saying his career is going to end up like this, but his running style really is reminiscent of Le'Veon Bell. The patience is just incredible. He's also a particularly creative runner of the football and also possesses some really good burst. It's just he's not going to be housing some of these longer runs.
Yeah, and you see that on film with Le'Veon Bell too, Obviously, you see the highlights of him, right, where he's like got his hand on the back of his offensive line, waiting for the holes to develop, and then boom, burst upfield. That's what we see with Devin Neal time after time after time. And, he's definitely got the upside for sure to be a 3-down back at the next level with that Le'Veon Bell upside. He's just relatively easy to tackle, but we can't deny his production at Kansas. Did some really, really impressive things at Kansas over his, years there. And like you said, the vision is absolutely insane. We're rarely seeing him missing holes. And, whenever he does need to be a little creative, he can, kind of juke back and do whatever he needs to do to hit that second hole. So, yeah, we're definitely super impressed with him. And that just goes to show you how good this running back class is, because last year, where do you think Devin Neal would rank for you if he was coming out in 2023?
I think he would have been RB2, or he would have been right there with Trey Benson, and I think
sure.
landing spot would have probably decided that for me.
Yeah, and that he's our RB10, and we really like this guy. It just goes to show you how loaded this running back class is. So, moving on to the next guy, we have Woody Marks out of USC, former Mississippi State player. As a Mississippi State fan, I hate that we lost this guy. But anyways, Woody Marks. So, yeah, when it comes to Woody Marks, there's a few things to like. I think he graded out in our model a little bit better than he might actually be for us, really. But he's still our RB9. He's definitely not a super physical runner for sure. That hurts him a good bit. But in terms of his speed, some of the better speed in the class, definitely a pretty great to, lower end of elite in terms of athletes go. He definitely translate that onto the field as well. Great pass catcher, up there with some of the best in the class for sure. And mixes that with the elusiveness and, solid vision. He's just really not bad at anything. He's a little bit better athlete than Devin Neal is in terms of just the overall, track, ability, his speed and agility and burst. That all translates on the field, right? And the only thing that's really stopping this guy is, the physicality, right? He's not the biggest back and can get, tackled relatively easy, but definitely shows like he doesn't have very many weak areas at all. Do it all back for sure.
The only the astounding thing is, despite all the good we saw from him on film, we watched 3 straight games of film and he didn't break a tackle once.
I forgot about that. Yeah, he did not break a single tackle. I don't know what PFF has him in terms of broken tackles or missed tackles forced, but we didn't see him break one tackle. I forgot all about that. Yeah, that's truly impressive. I mean, we've graded 28 running backs, and he might be the only person to be able to say that.
Absolutely.
All right, moving on. Moving on to the next guy on the list. We got another guy that we didn't really particularly see coming in the top 10 for sure. It's Kyle Monangai out of Rutgers. Rutgers has another dog coming out. How did you feel about Kyle Monangai?
With Kyle Monangai, I think he's going to be a mixture of Isaiah Pacheco and Samaje Perine, but I just don't think that he's quite the athlete that Pacheco is. And so I think that he's Pacheco and that he runs with extreme aggression. He purposefully wants to deflate run defenders. He is going to crush you every single time on purpose. And his vision is quite good as well. It's just that he has no long speed. His speed is just about the worst in the class. His burst is surprisingly good for somebody with his build. He actually has, I believe, a 32 BMI, give or take. But he's basically a 0 in the passing game. But I will say that he does have the potential on really long third downs if a team wants to bring in a running back strictly to protect his quarterback. I think that his pass protection is quite good. His hand placement and especially his anchor is tremendous.
And, he's got that kind of Samaje Perine kind of aspect to him where, the Chiefs this year, yeah, they used him out of the backfield a little bit. And Kyle Monangai can do that. He's not going to be doing that at the next level, but we saw him absolutely abuse edge rushers from time to time. Definitely linebackers. They didn't stand a chance. Nickel blitzes. He picked up all of those and kept his quarterback safe every single time. And with that alone, that ability alone, he will find himself on an NFL roster. I have no doubt in my mind. And it's not like he's a terrible runner of the football. He's had some really good, productive years, right, at Rutgers. I don't see him being a camp body for sure. I don't think any of these top 10 guys are camp bodies by any means. And some of these guys aren't going to get necessarily great draft capital either, which is, kind of surprising. Your 5th round running backs aren't necessarily the odds are not in their favor for them to make the team usually, but I think all of these guys will definitely be carving out a role for sure. All right, moving on to the next guy in the class. A little bit of surprise, right? A lot of people's RB3. We got Kaleb Johnson. So out of Iowa. There's a lot to like with Kaleb Johnson. He's basically Ollie Gordon, but better. Definitely uplifted Iowa's offense by a lot this year. Iowa was a historic bad defense in 2023 and 2022, especially. Once he came in, he really, uplifted the team by a lot. And, that's saying something for sure. But things that you need to like about Kaleb Johnson. Obviously, he ran one of the slower 40-yard dashes, so you can't really expect, great speed or burst, really, or acceleration. His elusiveness is not great either. I mean, it's okay. He's not going to be using that very much. It's the physicality and his ability to bounce off tackles. Kind of reminds me a little bit of Scatabo, except he's bigger than Scatabo by a good margin. I think he's 6 foot, 6'1", 220 range, where Scatabo's in that 5'9" range. Kaleb Johnson just runs a little high for me, and I think that's why he is fallen from that RB3 spot where he was, before we watched any film, to that RB7 spot. Still a great runner for sure, but I just feel like his durability is going to be really tested with how he runs and bouncing off tackles. I don't think that translates necessarily well at the next level, but in terms of just what I saw on film as a runner outside of the pad level, I mean, he's really violent and has really good vision. He's very similar to Omarion Hampton in terms of running style. He just runs a little higher and has a little less juice to him. But yeah, I definitely think Kaleb Johnson could be a 3-down back. I'm thinking he's going to be a late second round, early third round guy. So he's definitely going to be involved in whatever team game plan, whoever drafts him.
Yeah, so one thing people will say is that the Iowa offensive line was great and was always curating holes for him, and that it was so easy for him, and that's a particular ding for him. Now, I will say, first of all, okay, if that's true, you still have to be able to find the holes and exploit them, right? He can do that, and he's exceptional and very consistent. He rarely misses cutback lanes. And I will say, I saw on film several times where even when the run plays weren't blocked correctly, he still found a way to gain positive yardage. It's just, he just does not have that in-game long speed consistently to be able to break these longer runs. Now, we did see a couple of longer runs from him, but the angles were terrible. And then on one, he broke multiple tackles on a reception, for instance, for like a 60-yard touchdown. So it definitely could happen, but I think with the NFL, they're just going to be more disciplined. He's probably not going to have an offensive line quite as good as he had here. And like you said, he bounces off of people, not runs through them as well due to pad level.
Yep. All right, moving on to our next guy. We have one of your favorite running backs in the entire class. If he hits, it's going to be absolutely insane. We have RJ Harvey at a UCF.
Yeah, so with him, our player comp actually was LaShawn McCoy, believe it or not. His side-to-side agility is incredible. His jump cuts are a thing of art. He also has decent contact balance. He's not afraid to be physical. Some of these bigger backs, like Kaleb Johnson, we just mentioned, definitely have the ability to be a little bit more physical, but that's just due to frame. Now, in terms of his speed and acceleration, his burst is tremendous. It's not quite the best in the class, but it is up there in the top 8, I'd say for sure. And this is a great running back class. Now, I will say in the receiving game, he did have some drops, but he is able to be used vertically down the field. I saw him on a couple of wheel routes, and he did catch those. And so I've seen him have the over-the-shoulder ability with his hands. It's just we did see several concentration drops. So I think that this guy, and he's also a very creative runner in the open field. He'll make you miss in a phone booth, just constantly maximizing yardage. And his team's passing game was laughable, and yet it did not matter. He was constantly making things happen.
Yeah, UCF was definitely a run-heavy offense. QB runs with running backs as well. Did not have much in terms of passing offense for sure. But yeah, like RJ Harvey is up there with TreVeyon Henderson, who we'll talk about a little bit later, as far as the most agile and elusive backs in the entire class, in my opinion. He's just super special in terms of just that agility, making people miss. And, we were quite impressed with his physicality, too. He mixes elusiveness and physicality together in like this beautiful blend where I think it would be hard for me to imagine him not on a roster with a significant role. And I think he's going to be one of those guys that, is going to be in the third round, late second of your dynasty rookie drafts, and you're going to have to take him. You're going to have to. So next up, Another guy that people are really high on, some people's RB2 in the class, some people's RB3 in the class. We have Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State. Definitely has some of the best production of any player on this list. Just there's a few limitations with him, but here's a lot of things that he does well. One, super smart runner. Very good at hitting holes. Has decent speed, not great. Not like his teammate TreVeyon Henderson, who we'll talk about in a minute. But just a super physical bulldog kind of player. Really good at just everything, really. Finding holes, has some of the better vision in the class, right? Just has no flaws, really, in my opinion. I think he's a very good pass catcher as well. He's going to be a 3-down back at the next level, no questions asked, and he's going to have a mixture of that, second round, maybe even early second round draft capital where he's going to be involved in whatever team that drafts him's game plan from day one, in my opinion, unless you're the Seattle Seahawks. But, he's going to be fed early and often, I think, whenever he gets drafted. And I just don't see a world where he's not going to be at least somewhat productive at the next level. It's just that he's not super elusive. He doesn't have that top-end speed, but when it comes to being physical and getting yards extra after contact, I mean, there's few people that do it better than Judkins.
I'll say one of the biggest criticisms we have of Judkins is that when things aren't blocked for him, he doesn't create as well as you would like. But if he goes to somewhere with a decent offensive line, there is a chance that he finishes as an RB1 in fantasy, especially if he has total control of the backfield. As you mentioned, he is a 3-down back. He can be used vertically down the field. We saw him used split out wide, actually. So this guy's upside, make no mistake, is absolutely incredible. It's just landing spot, I think, for him specifically, is going to be one of the most important of any of these running backs.
And, he kind of reminds me a lot of Kareem Hunt in a way, right? Like, just early on Kareem Hunt, like, that's not a slight at all to Judkins. Like, coming out, Kareem Hunt on the Chiefs was really good. And he was even good this past year as, like, a goal line guy. And I think that's his floor. Judkins is going to be this goal line back, right, with some pass catching upside. But yeah, like you said, if he goes to a team that doesn't block very well, his efficiency is going to go way down. Look at his junior year at Ole Miss. I mean, they weren't able to block for him very well, and I think he averaged like 4.1 yards a carry, which is terrible for college. So yeah, definitely need to look at landing spot for him. That's probably he might be the most affected of any running back in the class as far as his landing spot goes. All right, next up is our running back number 4 in the entire class, which is some people's RB2, a lot of people's RB2 in the class. It's Omarion Hampton out of North Carolina. How do you feel about Omarion Hampton?
Yeah, so with Hampton, I think that he and Caleb Johnson are relatively similar players. It's just, I think the issues I have with Caleb Johnson, I don't have with Hampton. So they're both very physical. He has incredible contact balance, some of the best in the class. His vision, he's almost spotless with his vision. I think it's a little bit better than Caleb Johnson's, but both of theirs are great. Now, the issue is, while yes, people will say he ran, in the 4.4s in terms of his 40-yard dash time, I just don't think that shows up on film quite as much. And so I know people are going to say, oh, what do you mean he's not incredibly fast? Look at his 40 time. When you're not wearing any pads is different than when you're wearing pads. So in game, I don't think his speed quite translates, but he has good burst. Now, I will say one of the biggest criticisms I have for him in terms of as a runner is he reminds me a lot of Josh Jacobs in that he just doesn't have great agility or change of direction overall. But for somebody with his frame, I would say it's a little bit above average. It's just contextualizing that in the grand scheme of things with when you have players like we're going to talk about with TreVeyon Henderson, for instance. But I will say I do think he has more passing game upside, specifically with his route running. Because while I think Caleb Johnson, for instance, does have very good soft hands, Hampton does as well. but he has more lateral agility, and I do think that's going to give him a higher ceiling at the NFL level.
Yeah, and some of the things that I was really impressed with was, his just run IQ as a whole, right? Where he would just get the ball and assess the situation and then cut back to whatever hole he deemed was necessary. Now, he wasn't always perfect, and no running back is, but he was probably closest to the most perfect vision out of this entire class. There's a few people, maybe some of the guys ahead of him have, on par vision, but he might have the best vision in the entire class. And yeah, like you said, in terms of the 40 time, we actually thought on film he was slightly slower than Kaleb Johnson, which sounds a little insane, but yeah, we just didn't really see that translate on film. And, call us crazy, but, he is the better back in our opinion. He just, the combine's definitely going to increase his draft stock a ton. So he might even sneak into the first round. And if that's the case, he's definitely going to be going up our dynasty rankings for sure. But in terms of just what we saw on film, he's our RB4 for us. All right, moving on to the last guy in the A tier, a guy that's going to be, somebody we talk about a lot here that's not generating any buzz at all, in our opinion, is Jordan James out of Oregon. I could go on and on about this guy. It seems kind of insane that we have him ahead of Omarion Hampton, which is, like I said, a lot of people's RB2 of the class. I'll just say I watched pretty much every single snap. We both did. Every single snap of Jordan James this year. And I don't know if we came back more impressed with any other person in this draft class than Jordan James, just because he's so consistent. Now, does he do everything absolutely perfectly? No. But as far as the physical back goes, he checks all of those boxes. He's super physical. Maybe not initially when he gets the ball, but that doesn't matter because he has elite acceleration. He's got top 2, top 3 acceleration in this entire class. He can burst up the line. His vision's really good. And then once he gets to that second level, good luck tackling this guy. He's going to bulldoze over you. And then he mixes that with some of the better speed in the class, some of the better agility in the class. And fun fact about this guy, we watched maybe 12 games of Jordan James in totality, mixed with him, Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, all those guys we watched multiple All-22s on. We didn't see Jordan James get tackled for loss one time, maybe once, but he does not have negative plays on film basically ever. And, maybe he's not the best pass catcher, but he's good enough to be utilized at the next level. There's just no flaws that I see with him. And I know people say he doesn't have any long touchdowns. I think that's due to just luck, because he definitely has the speed in order to, break these longer runs, I think, at the next level. But yeah, he reminds me a lot of kind of a mixture of Breece Hall and Aaron Jones. A lot of Aaron Jones, though.
Yeah, and people say, oh, the slow 40-yard dash time. Once again, just because somebody runs a certain speed without any pads on doesn't mean it looks the same on the field. I don't think he loses any speed when it comes to with pads on the field. I do think it is just chance that he hasn't had any of these long runs. Now, he's not Bashal Tootin. That's not what we're saying, obviously. But I do think there is a ton of upside with him. And I do think that unless he goes to a spot where there is somebody that is just a truly elite running back, or at the very least has a significant team investment in terms of monetary value, I don't see how he doesn't take over the backfield. And like you said, he doesn't have that initial power, but once he gets ahead of steam, he looks for contact, and he is very physical and falls forward. And the best part that we haven't even mentioned yet is he has that James Cook ability at the goal line, and he will be scoring touchdowns.
And also, with the James Cook ability, he always fights for extra yards and falls forward for those extra 3 to 4 yards every time if he's able to. And that's just an ability that, we're seeing become more and more prominent these past few seasons in the NFL. So I think we mocked him in the 3rd or the 4th round. Yeah, he's definitely one of my guys, my favorite backs in the entire class. But moving on to number 2 on the list, it's definitely my favorite runner of the entire class. Privilege that you get to speak about him. It's TreVeyon Henderson out of Ohio State. As you can see, a lot of greens there, a lot of green bars.
So I'm going to start out with the negatives because there's hardly any, and everything else is a positive. So with Henderson, he is not an early declarer, which once again doesn't translate quite as much with the running backs, but we would prefer him be a little bit younger, but it's still fine. He's also not the most physical back, and he has dealt with injuries in 2 of 4 seasons. So durability is a potential concern. So let's get that out of the way. Those are the only negative things I can even say about him. In terms of his vision, it's elite, some of the best in the class. Ball security, not an issue. Run IQ, elite. His agility is potentially only rivaled by RJ Harvey, but I'd still give the edge to Henderson. His deceleration, his hezzy moves, his dead leg in the open field is lethal. He's a plus pass catcher. He has the ability to be a Jahmyr Gibbs like player, in my opinion. And the player comp I had for him was Reggie Bush. I think, though, that he could be Reggie Bush, I think, in today's NFL would have been a much bigger deal than he was way back in the day. And I will probably never give a Reggie Bush comp again. This guy is going to be absolutely special. Oh, and did I mention he also has very good contact balance?
Yeah, and on top of that, contact balance is a mix. I think he ran a 4.42 40 as well, so very high end speed. We actually thought he was going to run the fastest, in that 4.38 range. He was just slightly slower than that. But yeah, I mean, you go watch this guy's tape. It's absolutely insane what he's doing in the open field. And I know the physicality isn't something that's overwhelmingly apparent on film. But we see him use it. I mean, it's not like he's running over guys consistently, but he can use it to get extra yardage if he's in a phone booth and he doesn't really think the agility moves will work, right? He will put his pads down and get those extra 3 or 4 yards. He's just, I think, the highest upside runner in the entire class. If this guy hits, like you said, it's going to be Jahmyr Gibbs. Maybe even higher than Jahmyr Gibbs, in my opinion. And I think he'll be in that first round conversation as well, if not early to mid-second at the very latest. Like you said, the Reggie Bush, I do want to go on a quick tangent with Reggie Bush. Sean Payton used him as like this utility guy and didn't really give him a ton of carries because they had Deuce McAllister there, I think, for at least a little bit. So they didn't utilize him as like the 3-down back. I think TreVeyon Henderson can be that 3-down back with that Jahmyr Gibbs upside, and wherever he goes, he's going to be the lead back. All right, surprise, surprise. At the 1 spot, Ashton Jeanty out of Boise State. I know, big surprise, right? It's just really hard for me to place anybody over him. I think you agree, right? I mean, the production speaks for itself. The highlight runs speaks for itself. He's just not bad at anything. He has some fumbles because they gave him the ball like 300 times this year, which is insane. But I know you're probably surprised with the pass catching being up at the green. Yeah, so as a sophomore, he had over 500 receiving yards. Had a bunch of catches as well. So, they didn't really lean on him to do that this year. They just said, here, run the rock a bunch of times. And obviously it took him to the college football playoff. I don't want to hate on Boise State too much, but I will say, I don't know if Boise State wins 5 games this year without Jeanty at the helm. I mean, that's how much he uplifted his team. Obviously, another thing that I do like, I didn't speak on this about anybody else on this, but when you look at any interviews with Jeanty, he seems like a super smart, humble guy as well. So I don't see a world where he misses unless he just suffers a traumatic injury at the beginning of his career. I think he's going to be a top 5 to 8 running back in the NFL right off the rip. I mean, there's nothing that this guy does particularly bad.
I'm going to keep this short and sweet. I think he is a mixture of Alvin Kamara and Kenneth Walker. That's pretty much all I need to say.
Yeah,
Not quite as much with the pass catching as Kamara in terms of the route running. Very close though, and I think he is a mixture of those two players.
yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And yeah, that's our rankings. We think we went over all 28 of them for sure. Everybody that we thought was draftable, and then some undrafted guys. I think like guys like Jaden Blue and Trevor Etienne, I think are projected to be undrafted, or seventh round guys. But yeah, if there's anybody that you thought that we missed, please feel free to comment below. We're always looking for new prospects and stuff. Definitely sleepers as well. But yeah, we think we got pretty much everybody.
Yeah, so we're going to be coming out with more of these positional rankings pre NFL draft. By the way, we are also going to be live for the actual NFL draft, having a draft party. So feel free to check out our live. It's going to be awesome. And then we're also obviously post NFL draft going to have updated positional rankings as well as comprehensive rankings for your dynasty and redraft rankings as well. And it's just going to be an awesome time.
Absolutely. I cannot wait for it. Literally, it's only a month, a little over a month left, and then we get the NFL draft. I'm super stoked for it. Yeah, be on the lookout for these, more rankings videos. We'll be putting out the wide receiver, QBs, and tight ends hopefully here soon.